Welcome to the Pivot Point Podcast. This season, I'm focused on sharing stories and ideas from experts on diversity and inclusion. In this episode, I'm going to share some insights and ideas from myself, Julie Kratz. Together, I'm going to leave you with some actionable tips to think about and discuss with your organization. We share this information because inclusive leadership is a journey. It requires bravery and courage, and you do not have to do it alone. At Next Pivot Point, I believe we are stronger together. We are one. So we've been doing a bit of a binge today on some key monthly topics around diversity and inclusion and awareness. So February is Black History Month, and we talked a bit about how white people, especially, and those that identify perhaps as not a people of color, can participate in the conversation around African American history because it indeed is all of our histories. Then we talked about Women's History Month of March and how to plan a good event or how to get people together and have a meaningful conversation with key actionable takeaways. The final in our trilogy of our binge podcasting for today on diversity and inclusion is April, is the month of celebrating Diversity Month. So it is in fact Diversity Month. It's important to notice there's a lot of different claims to different months out there. So while this is Diversity Month, there's also Global Diversity Awareness is in October. So choose your own adventure, much as I ask of you always as allies. But if you want to call this Diversity Month in April, some key ideas that I'm seeing with my clients and seeing with organizations that are getting D&I right. And what I would encourage you to do is think about how could you celebrate this in a meaningful way that's not just a one and done, a check the box activity, but that we're really dedicated to overall diversity and inclusion, and that this conversation is not just happening in a vacuum in April. So I would actually encourage you first and foremost to string together a series of intentional communications or intentional programming, intentional speakers, intentional books, whatever it is that you want to do, the tools to provide education. As we've mentioned with Black History Month and Women's History Month, there are some wonderful resources on our website. Check out the resources page where we have book lists, podcasts, guest podcasts, all sorts of videos that you could play. And for Diversity and Inclusion Month in particular, what I would recommend to y'all that are wanting to celebrate and be intentional and string together in a meaningful way is think about how could you have a conversation around allyship. So my number one recommendation and what I'm seeing from clients that are getting this right is the conversation's not just about people of color. It's not just about different ethnicities. It's not just about disabilities, LGBTQ plus, or gender. That it's really an intersectional experience. And so what I'd like for you to think about is how can allies across all the diversity dimensions come together and be a part of a holistic conversation on diversity that really embraces all of the different dimensions of diversity. A couple key tools that might be helpful for that ally conversation. One that I really like is called the Diversity Wheel. It simply highlights all the different dimensions of diversity, from socioeconomic to geography to how you learn to your personality to the others that we typically identify as markers of diversity like gender, race, etc. What it helps allies do and why it's important for the allies conversation is that people see themselves as having an element of diversity. We in fact all do because we are human and all created differently and all behave differently. This is a good thing. If we were all the same, it would be quite boring. So celebrating that, celebrating our uniqueness, our unique attributes, the way that we, our experiences, the way that we see the world through our lens should be celebrated. And it's something, a gift that we have to offer to our organization. So if we are not feeling seen, heard, belong inside an organization, our organization's not getting the best from us. So how do we celebrate that uniqueness and those dimensions of diversity? So the Diversity Wheel, you can have a conversation about that. That's easy to facilitate. Simply pass that out. Simply do a Google search on that image. You can pass them out, ask people to identify their markers of diversity, and have a candid conversation about that, of the uniqueness of the human experience. And for many, especially cisgender, able-bodied white men that typically see themselves as not a part of the diversity conversation, those that we really need as our allies the most because they're in positions of power and privilege, this is an excellent vehicle to bridge, take the diversity bridge across from diversity land to Everyone experiences diversity. Everyone has an element of diversity. Now, a couple key points to make that successful. This is not a contest. So no one wins by being more diverse than someone else. It is not a comparison game, and you really need to create a brave, safe place for people to share differences about themselves that they may not have shared with people before. We know, for example, the LGBTQ plus community, 50% of gay people are closeted at work. Right. Trans people, extremely closeted in the workplace. And there's just not a lot of psychological safety around some of the elements of diversity. So keep that in mind. Make sure that you're creating a brave, psychologically safe place where people can be their full selves and not have to hold back or fear retaliation. Take the competitive edge out. And then more importantly, as we've highlighted with our last two in the series, is make sure there's an actionable takeaway, that people have a take-home activity, something they can do with the content, a way that they can create a conversation maybe back with their work team or back in a few weeks where there's a homework assignment of some sort, and just maybe a thought question, a 5-minute thought exercise for someone to work on between now and the next intentional program. So it's really important that it's not one and done, that you have something else, I would say in May, June, July, at a minimum, 3 months to come back and celebrate another element of diversity. There's certainly plenty of opportunities if you look at the global diversity calendar. In particular, Mental Health Awareness Month in May, LGBTQ Pride Month in June, and then we have a number of activities happening in July as well. And then in August, we actually have the Women's Suffrage 100th anniversary to celebrate that. So that's something really interesting and so forth. Now, another idea besides the diversity wheel I would offer is to talk about your diversity stories. So similar vein of getting our allies to recognize themselves as part of the diversity message and part of the diversity story is to talk specifically about a time when you felt different, perhaps a time when you felt like you didn't belong, or even deeper, a time when you had to really pretend to be a different version of yourself to fit in with the majority group. And this has happened to us as humans. There's no aside from having our basic needs met, we know that humans are social creatures and seek belonging and connection in the workplace. And so if you felt different, felt like you didn't belong, or felt like you had to show a different part of yourself to fit in, your workplace isn't getting the best from you. I think when our allies can embrace, I've experienced that. Again, this is not a competition, but I've experienced something like that, right? I was different than the rest of the group. Maybe I was a very extroverted engineer, for example, or I was on a project team and no one asked for my opinion. Whatever it is, you've had an experience where you felt like the other, quote unquote, meaning you felt different. There were subtle signals you didn't belong, and you had to pretend to be a different version of yourself. When you have to pretend to be a different version of yourself, it is exhausting day in and day out. And so there's a mental toll that takes on a human. And again, if we're filtering, we're spending time thinking about that, doing the mental Olympics. We're certainly not producing at the highest quality level, producing the most that we could in the workplace, and we're simply not contributing to a client experience that's probably the one we want to create if we're having to do that mental agility to fit in. So think about Diversity Awareness Month, and how could you champion this type of thinking around diversity storytelling, the dimensions of diversity with a diversity wheel, and then think intentionally about the programming, the ideas, the tools that you want to share throughout the year, and be very clear what that next step is, because people want to continue this conversation. The one and done is not intentional. It is not meaningful, and actually can cause a retaliatory effect of people not believing it's actually that important. A client of mine, I'm partnering with them on their global day of allyship, and I'm really excited about this in April because they see April as Diversity Awareness Month as the opportunity to bring their entire global team together on a webcast, and they have a live office in Chicago where we'll be broadcasting from the video where I'll be speaking. But I'll be talking about Lead Like an Ally, my new book about strategies to facilitate inclusion in the workplace told through a story with a manager toolkit. What's great about that is they're going to learn kind of those key attributes of what it means to be an inclusive leader alongside one another, have a shared experience, and they're going to have a take-home assignment where they work on thinking through how they can apply these principles specifically with a specific intentional instructional guide and workbook to do that. So make sure your team has the tools to carry the information forward to implement it. I was just on the phone with a client today that said those motivational rah-rah speeches are a thing of the past. People want tools. They want information. They want content. They want to know what to do with the information. So don't make that mistake. Make sure that it's intentional, that it's clear, and there's a logical next step. So I hope you have a wonderful Diversity Awareness Month and celebrate with some of the ideas that we've highlighted here. Check out our resources page at nextpivotpoint.com for more ideas as well. Did you know that you can find all 5 seasons of our 50-plus episodes at nextpivotpoint.com? There, you can sign up for a complimentary 7-day preview of our new program, Lead Like an Ally. Order our new book, Lead Like an Ally. I appreciate you listening to this episode. Who do you know that needs to hear this message? Hit the share button and connect with me on LinkedIn. Simply search Julie Kratz, Kratz. I post every day. I host this podcast because I believe we are stronger together. We are one.